then I go back. We're going to talk a little bit about myself. I didn't come up with this idea, by the way. Jake and the boys came up with this idea. And the theory here being that you get to learn a little bit about Johnson Consulting because that's how this whole thing emanated from my little office in Naples, Florida at the time. But also kind of the background and what we've done through the years, and I thought it might be interesting. The first part's going to slow a little bit, but we'll get going. And what I'm proud of most is proud of Johnson Consulting and all the things we've done. But what I really enjoyed most in funeral service was my operational days. And we're going to get into that here in just a minute. But let's talk about where it all started. Batesville, Indiana. Did anybody know I was actually born and raised in Batesville, Indiana? Yeah, believe it or not. My grandfather was a local banker there for 50 years. My father was a banker there for 50 years. My brother was a banker. And my brother-in-law was a banker, my one brother-in-law. And the other one was a butcher. I think he was probably the happiest of all. He was one hell of a butcher. He was a great guy. But it was obvious my career was headed towards banking as I was growing up in Batesville. Hillenbrand was a dominant employer. I mean, we had the world's largest manufacturer of caskets, the world's largest manufacturer of hospital furniture, in a town of that time about 3,500 people. Unbelievable, unbelievable. It was truly a company town. I mean, you couldn't walk down the street without seeing somebody at Hillenbrand or the casket company or Hill-Rom. It's just the way it was. If you went to a party, guess what you talked about? Caskets or hospital furniture. And my major focus was none of that. My major focus was basketball and baseball. That's what I enjoyed doing, besides fishing, hunting, whatever else. So the little less, I mean, when you grow up in a small town, you learn some things, some things that stick with you. I mean, the people there are certainly hard-working people with the small town values. I had strong family values. My father was the mayor of Batesville at one point in time. He was the head of the Boy Scouts. He was the chief layperson at the church. My dad went to church every day of the week, Catholic church, and he sung in the choir on Sunday, so he'd have to go back because he didn't think that counted as going to church. So he'd go twice on Sunday. That's the Lord's truth. What I learned through my sports was the joy of winning. Nothing like winning when you're doing business, whatever else. It's nothing beats winning. But I also learned how to lose. And I think that's something that's missing a little bit today when kids are in soccer or whatever else. Who gets trophies nowadays? Everybody. And I understand the thought of that, okay? But you got to learn how to be a good winner, and you got to learn how to be a good loser. You don't have to like losing, but you got to learn how to do it. So on to Butler University. Anybody ever hear of Butler University? Well, because it became a little bit of a sports palace about 7 or 8 years ago with their basketball teams. When I was there, we had a strong basketball team. I played basketball and baseball, went on a full scholarship. I was a business administration major because I didn't know what else to do and I needed to get through school. That's what I did. Focus on marketing and management. Played basketball and baseball, like I said. I married my wife, Jake's mom, my sophomore year. We've been now married for 45 years. I actually dated her when she was an 8th grader. Huh? Come on, that's pretty good. The women here ought to like that. All right, well, what I've learned at Butler more than anything else is that sports paid for my education, but sports was not going to get me to where I wanted to go in the future. And there was an infamous coach up there by the name of Tony Hinkle. Anybody from the Midwest, you've heard of Tony Hinkle. He was the last big-time NCAA Division I coach to coach basketball, baseball, and football. Hinkle was something else. But Hinkle walked up to me at the start of my sophomore year, and he said, Johnny, he called me Johnny. He said, I was the first freshman to letter in baseball at Butler. And it was just the start of basketball season. We were in our 3rd week of practice, and he walked up to me and said, kid, you're one of the best shots I've ever coached. I said, well, thanks, Hank. I appreciate that. He said, you're also one of the slowest white men I've ever been associated with. He did. I mean, and that's what I learned, that being a small town, big basketball hero doesn't make it to the next level. necessarily. I mean, I went from a 6'4" or 6'3.5" center to a 6'3.5" slow shooting guard in college. Didn't make it. So what do we do from here? I immediately came back home and said, all right, Dad, I'm ready to go to work for you. And he looked at me and said, not yet. You need to go get some experience. So there's a bank in Cincinnati, Ohio called Fifth Third Bank. It's one of the largest regional banks around today. And so I went up there. I was a management trainee for a little bit, assistant manager at a branch manager. Then I became the junior vice president of correspondent banking. And all that means is that you call on small banks in states and try to sell your services, wire transfer services. You want, at the end of the day, every little bank has to send their money somewhere to get it to the Fed. And we wanted them to send it to Fifth Third Bank. And that was my job for some time. And then just a couple lessons learned that kind of get ahead of myself a little bit. But Jim Gott was a guy. Do you all have somebody as you went through your career that made an impression on you and gave you some advice and kind of stick to you? Jim Gott was one of the first ones for me. And I remember I walked up to Jim when I was assistant manager, went to him and said, hey, could you tell me how to do this, 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 this? And he said, sure. So he told me. And about a day later, I came up and said, Jim, can you tell me how to do this, this, and this, and this? And it was the same thing I asked him 2 days ago. He said, I'll tell you what, kid. I'll tell you once, and I'll tell you twice how to do something. But I'm not going to tell you a third time. If you can't figure it out on yourself the third time, you're not going to make it in business. So that's lesson number one. Then it was Tom O'Donnell. I was at the bank for 4 years. Now I'm a correspondent banker, which was really kind of a neat job at Fifth Third. But I mean, it was moving slow. I mean, I'm kind of a fast-paced guy. For any of you that's been around me, you know that. And banking is, back in those days especially, it was slow. They go to work on this floor, on the executive floor at Fifth Third Bank, and you'd get there and you'd go have a little coffee break, have some coffee, read a paper. Then about 10:30, you took your first break. Then about 11:30 to 12, you'd go to the company lunchroom, which was right there, and all the execs would flock to the company exec room. Then about 2:30, guess what we did? We took another break, by God. 15 minutes, but we took a break. And it drove me nuts. And so I was talking to Tom O'Donnell, who was my sidekick, and I said, yeah, I don't know if I could take this anymore, da-da-da-da-da. And he said, you gotta learn one thing in life. If you're not happy with what you're doing, get out. Either learn to live with it or get out. Don't sit around and grouse. And I had become a little bit of a grouser at that time. So Tom taught me that. So the lessons learned, banking was very low pay, especially in those days. The hierarchy up above could make some money, but by and large, the grunt banker, I will say, didn't make a lot of money. And to get where I wanted to go would take a very long time. I learned that making loans, as we made loans to customers, I was a hell of a lender. You came in, you had a smile on your face, hell, I'd give you the money, okay? But for the most part, those people were making a lot of money with those loans, okay? They were building value. And I was still making, at the time, I think it was $7,400 as a vice president, assistant vice president, $7,500 a year. But, now it was nice to go to parties and people say, who are you? You know, I'm Tom Johnson. Oh, what do you do? I'm a banker. And people go, wow. The lesson I learned later when I went to work for the casket company is to go to parties and say, oh, what do you do? Well, I'm in the casket business. You know? Oh, shoot. A big difference. I missed that part. But it just wasn't aggressive enough for me. I felt like a caged lion. And I really, at the end of it all the day, I didn't like banking. I really didn't. So what do? I go to Batesville Casket Company. And first I had to break the news to Dad. And that was not a very pleasant day. But I just told him, I said, I really don't care about banking. I want to give this a try. There was kind of an unwritten rule in the family that you didn't go to work for Hillenbrand's. Hillenbrand was kind of not the bad guy, but I don't know. He didn't want me to do that. But I did it anyhow. I started as a sales training manager for Batesville Casket. Anybody want to ask me how much sales training experience I had? Absolutely none. Absolutely none. But I did it. Then they made me the director of sales support and manpower development. Do you remember those days? And I'm not sure what that was, but I know what I had. I was in charge of merchandising, the farm, convention shows, this, that, whatever. I was just kind of do-it-all guy, really. And then this is the significant part. I started Batesville. If you were a 60-volume funeral home anywhere in the United States and you bought an 821 Neapolitan, am I remembering this right? You would pay $400. If you were SCI or IFS or whatever, the national accounts, and you were buying 2,000 to 3,000, 4,000 caskets a year, for that 821 Neapolitan Blue, you would pay $400. So everybody paid the same price. So Batesville at that time was the champion, for sure, of the little guy. But guess how much business we were doing with SCI, Uniservice, Pierce Brothers, and IFS? Hardly any. They wanted some kind of retribution for the fact that they were buying a lot of caskets. So I'm the bad guy. I'm the one that started all this major discounting stuff and whatever. Now it exploded after I was gone. My God, today it's unbelievable how you buy caskets. You can't. It's not what the list price is. It's how big is your rebate, how big is your discount, and all this stuff. And it's become, back in my day, when we sold caskets, more importantly, when you sold a casket to a family, you really informed that family of what that casket was all about and what it did, what it didn't do. Today, it's a blue box in your showroom. Very few people go through the explanations anymore. It's become more of a commodity. But I think that's where it kind of started from. Like it or not, I was a big part of that. So what I learned at Batesville is a well-managed company. I mean, it always has been, it always will be. And Troy was talking about a little bit yesterday, but Batesville really does focus on the customer. I mean, they got issues. How would you like to be a casket company nowadays? Did you saw that line? How many barrel caskets are being sold year after year? So you talk about challenges, they really got challenges. But they never lose sight of the customer. They're very customer focused. It's a good company. I learned a lot there. They have meetings. I don't know how many of you all have staff meetings, but if you don't, you should. What I've learned, and one of the things I learned at Batesville, they have meetings. Oh my God, do they have meetings. And it drove me crazy. It just drove me crazy. But as you progress through your career, you learn the importance of meetings. The importance of meetings is getting everybody on the same page and letting people voice what they think that we should do and whatever else. And then when you leave the meeting room, you're out in concert tackling the job ahead. Strategic and tactical planning, Jake's going to get into that today. Glenn talked about it. Troy talked about it. It's probably the most important thing I learned. And what's amazing to me, I've been in funeral service for 40 years, so I know a lot of funeral directors around the country, large and small. It's amazing how many people do very little planning, if anything. We'll get into that a little bit later. Merchandising, I learned how to merchandise. You had to back in those days. And merchandising was very important, played a very important role in a couple slides ahead. But I wasn't the king of merchandising, but I pretty much got a pretty good grasp of it. Leadership, we're going to get to him in a second. But I also learned what a good leader can do to a company, okay? Leadership is something that is hard to find too sometimes. Because what are the traits of a good leader? It's kind of, you just see it. When you talk to somebody, you're around their companies or whatever else, you'll know if they're a good leader, if they're leading the troops. At Batesville, there were guys by the name of Paul Buck. Everybody remember Paul? That's going back pretty far. Hell of a guy, okay? He was my early mentor. Dave Hirt, remember Dave Hirt? God rest his soul. And Bill Bischoff, who was not president of the company, but he was very involved in a lot of aspects of the company. And those guys were really good leaders. They really brought their team with them wherever they went. And then there's Evan Mollenkopf. What I learned from Evan Mollenkopf. Evan is nobody knows Evan, I don't think, do you know Evan? Evan was one of the tough, roughest guys at Batesville Cask Company, but they always had him involved in all the support services and people development. And one day he walked up to me and he said, "When's the last time you said no?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Every time somebody asks you to do something, you say, 'Sure, I'll do that.'" And I said, "Well, then I'm a young lion, isn't that what I'm supposed to do?" He said, "Well, to a degree. You got to make sure you can effectively do what you're committing to these people. You're overcommitting." And I had become a real overcommitter, so that I had so much on my plate, I became less effective of all the things that was going on. So, I mean, it's a little trait. I don't know if you all find yourself in that role somewhere, but you got to separate the real important things from the things, okay? And make sure you're focusing on the right things. That's what I learned from Evan. How many people remember International Funeral Service? Just a few. International Funeral Service was the second largest public company at the time, it started in Des Moines, Iowa, but it was out in San Diego at the time. And I went to work for International Funeral Service. They were one of my accounts. By the way, when I was in Batesville, we basically got 100% of International Funeral Service business, 100% of Pierce Brothers business, almost all of Uniservice's business up in Portland, and none of SCI's. Not a one. I couldn't break them. But anyhow, that's beside the point. They had 80 funeral homes, and their pre-need program was non-existent. Now they had a bunch of cemeteries, 40 cemeteries. They had more cemeteries than SCI had, and more combos than SCI had. Paul Hamilton was a little bit ahead of himself in that regard. And their pre-need program in their cemeteries was strong, very strong. Their pre-need program in their funeral homes was non-existent. And that's what they hired me and asked me to do. After 2 years, we were selling more pre-need in the funeral homes than they were selling in the cemeteries. And what I learned is pre-need is pretty doggone important, and it can really predict your future if you do it right. So anyhow, that's my first job. And then they never had, Vic Evans was president of the company at the time, God love him. And Vic was a shy guy, he was a great guy. Very financially astute, but he would never have a staff meeting, none. And so finally one day I said, Vic, you got to have a staff meeting. And they had this big round table. You could fit, it was kind of like Austin Powers movie with this big round table. Thank God they didn't have the ejection seats. But Vic finally he called his first staff meeting. So we all get in there, okay, and we're sitting around the table. And he looks at me and goes, okay, Tom, have your staff meeting. But we started having staff meetings, and the first one wasn't so meaningful except it was the first staff meeting. But after that, everybody started getting on the same page because everybody kind of got what the company was doing. And it was important that everybody engaged. So then they said, we're having trouble out of Greenwood. Anybody familiar with Greenwood Memorial Park? 1,800 at the time funerals a year, 2,200 interments. They had 3 unions, one with the mausoleum workers, one with the grounds workers, and one with something else. And it was imploding, absolutely imploding. All of them were kind of threatening strike. One of them was out on strike. The general manager resigned. They had a mess on their hand, a real mess. So they said, well, let's send a kid in, see what he can do. And basically all I did at Greenwood was settle people down. You know, Merle Hamilton, God love him, he was a great cemeterian, but he wouldn't talk to his people. He didn't sit down and ask them what they want. Hell, we had a pizza party one night for the grounds workers, just a pizza party, and sat and listened to them for about an hour, 2 hours. And guess what? The next day they called it off. So the pizza, and then I wish Bob Horn was here because it was his idea. Anyhow, I went down there. I really enjoyed my time. It's where I learned a lot about operations. What I learned was I'm not the one that made the difference, but the people I chose to put in different slots, they sure made the difference. You know, I didn't turn Greenwood around. I just settled it down. They got it going. But unfortunately, IFS was sold to SCI. And at the time, I think this is kind of important, IFS had 80 funeral homes and 40 cemeteries. We think SCI at that time, this was in when was it? I can't remember what it was, but it was in the late 70s. And SCI had 160 funeral homes and 20 cemeteries. So what IFS did for SCI was put them on the map with cemeteries, combos. They really understood then the role of the combo. So what did I learn at IFS? Pre-need obviously was very important, and I understand pre-need. I don't work in that area much anymore, but I get it, so did the funeral directors. and it really helped with. It was amazing because the more aggressive we got on the pre-need side, our at-need business seemed to trickle up too because we just had agents out there talking about our funeral home. So that was good. The development of key people, like I said earlier, I didn't do it. There was a guy by the name of Enoch Glasscock. Anybody remember Enoch? And Enoch is he could just come in from Oklahoma. He talked like this in San Diego, California, and everybody thought, what the hell is this guy all about? But you know what? He was a really talented guy, really bright guy. And I was going to promote him to be the mortuary manager. And Vic called me up and said, no, you can't do that. He's too new. And I said, well, did you hire me to run this place, or are you going to run this place? Which was kind of a ballsy thing to say to the president of the company. But he said, no, all right, but have you considered this, this, and this? And I said, I've considered all the talent we have here. They wanted to bring somebody in from Canada. No defense to Canada, but we had a guy right here, Jim, I thought could do it. And Edie came in and did a wonderful job of that funeral home, managing that funeral home. Great guy. God rest his soul. All right, the power of the cemetery mortuary combination, despite the unions out on strike, despite no morale whatsoever in that company, despite just no management, no merchandising, the only thing that was going good was really pre-need cemetery. The combo just rolled on, okay? And I've been around, again, 40 years now, I've been around a lot of funeral homes. Funeral homes are more susceptible to falling than a combo is, just because of that heritage you got with all those interments you have in those cemeteries. It's a lion, and run properly, it's something else. So I learned the power of the cemetery mortuary combination. I also learned, I wasn't involved in it at all, but I was involved in the meetings about when they would go out on acquisition trail and learn how they considered buying funeral homes, what were the tactics in doing so, what you pay, how you paid, how you structure deals, da-da-da-da-da. So I learned a little bit about that at that point in time. Oh, yeah. What I also learned, it was the first time I'd been sold. Anybody been sold here? That doesn't feel good. That just does not feel good. And I'm a buyer, so I understand, but being sold is not a good thing. What you learn, you're not in charge of your future. That's a big lesson I learned. I wanted to somehow get in charge of my future. And working for somebody else, that's kind of hard to do. It's kind of hard to do. And although offered a very nice position at SCI at the time, I chose not to go with SCI. Hell, they wouldn't buy caskets from me. Why would I go work for them? Okay? But they did. They offered me a nice job. I didn't agree with the philosophy of SCI at the time. And back in those days, it was really simple. They had basically CPAs running their regions. I think they're good guys. But their idea of making money was cutting the hell out of costs, even at the expense of former owners at times, and raising prices, just raising prices. Selling excess property off because I can make my quarter by selling that property off. And they're going to pay hell for that in the years ahead because they sold a lot of property off they shouldn't have sold off. Anyhow, that's that part of it. So enter Pierce Brothers. Anybody remember Pierce Brothers? Pierce Brothers was one of the most prestigious firms in the country. They were known for a lot of good things that they had done over the years. They were the largest regional firm at the time. At the time, they had 17 funeral homes, 3 cemetery mortuary combinations, and 6,500 funerals a year. And it was really well thought of. So I had the choice of working for SCI or going to Pierce Brothers. I became president of Pierce Brothers. Now, here's the bad news. Here's the under the sheets Pierce Brothers. They had lost 500 calls the year prior and the 500 calls the year prior to that. Business was running out the door. There were reasons for it, and we'll get into it. Half of the locations were leased, and the leases were running out. That's scary. I don't know if you've ever been, you're about to lose the location that is making money for you. What are you supposed to do? Guess who owned most of those leases? Nobody would guess this. Forest Lawn controlled half of the leases that were running out. Because Mark Pierce in the day would go out and he'd say, I'm going to build a mortuary out here. I'll funnel I'll funnel business to you, Forest Lawn. Forest Lawn would take the money out of their endowment care fund, build the funeral home for them, and then lease back to Mark. So it's kind of interesting. The locations were in rough shape. I know Bill Hawkins knows that. I mean, the roofs were leaking, the carpets were bad. I could go down the list. The parking lots looked terrible. The grass was dying. The signs were a mess. Yeah, I mean, it was bad. It was really bad. Even this great prestigious firm. But if you were in LA, you knew that something was amiss at Pierce Brothers. The automobiles were something. They always let the managers pick their own automobiles, okay? And I swear to God, they were all color of the rainbow. You remember that. We had red ones and green ones and purple. We didn't have purple, but I mean, they were all colors of the rainbow. So one of the first things I did once we gathered some money up was we came to the color of what, Jeff Casey? Pierce Brothers blue. Pierce Brothers blue. I'll never forget the first Christmas party we had after we were becoming somewhat successful. And we were up at this country club up in somewhere, and a guy, the general manager, gets on the speakerphone. Now, we've got about 40 cars parked outside. They're all the same car. Everybody had the same car. With the owner of the blue Buick LeSabre, please, your lights are on. Well, everybody stood up and walked outside. Receivables were running about 90 days. Morale was really bad. It was really bad. And Pierce Brothers was losing $500,000, had lost $500,000 the year I got there. The owner had to throw in $500,000 just to keep us going. So, what'd we do? Uh-oh. Oh, shit, Jake. Well, we reorganized the top people in the company. We had some great, actually we didn't, well, I did fire a couple people. But there were 3 top people, and the one that was in charge of all of operations was the worst operator in the world. Great guy, Rudy Simone. We all remember Rudy Simone, Bernie. But Rudy was a great, what we did was we put him in charge of governmental affairs. Rudy really liked that. It got him out of operations. And we elevated the 2 guys that were under him, Ron Morey and Bob Salerno, and with my direction and with their knowledge, we started turning things around. We brought in a couple of key people. I brought Edic on up, okay, so because he did a good job at Greenwood. He didn't want to work for SCI either, so he gladly came up to LA. Then we brought Bob Horn in, and Bob Horn is all heck, Des Moines, Iowa, shucks, how you doing? Bob's a bright guy and a hard worker. We sold off non-producing. We lost $500,000 a year before I got there. So what we do? We had to look at all our properties and say where are we going to be and where are we not going to be. And we had some valuable assets. And one of them was we had the only funeral home in Beverly Hills, on 32 Maple Drive or whatever it is. And I said, well, we ought to sell Beverly Hills. We can get that money and go take it somewhere else. And they said, oh no, you can't sell Beverly Hills. Why can't we sell Beverly Hills? Well, that's where Mr. Albritton parks his Rolls, and his chauffeur lives there when he's not in town. I said, have anybody ever asked him about that? He said, well, no. I said, will you mind if I at least ask him? He said, well, it's dangerous. So we had a board meeting like two weeks later, and before the board meeting, I said, one thing I'm really seriously considering is selling Beverly Hills and taking some of that money and redeploying it. He said, I can't believe nobody's asked me that in the past. Yeah, I can park my car anywhere. But honest to God, they didn't make that move because of the fear of the unknown. And so we sold Beverly Hills for $3 million. Okay, back in those, it wasn't $3 million. It was a lot of money though. And redeployed that money. We merchandised all the showrooms. This one, you didn't have to be a whiz-bang funeral director or marketing guy to do what I did. They had like 10 selections under $1,000 in the showroom. 10 caskets under $1,000 in the showroom. Guess what we were selling? A lot of caskets at less than $1,000. So all we did was, and then also each manager had their own authority to buy whatever casket they wanted. So it was, it was kind of like the cars. We had a mishmash of everything. So basically what we did is I got with the senior guys and we said, all right, here's 30 caskets, all right, that they can choose from now. That's it, no more than these 30. And we'll let them make the choice. We're just going to make the choice of the price brackets. So we ended up having like a $500 entry unit, a $700. I think it was just two under 1,000, and then moved them up to where we wanted to go. Then we brought manager after manager in every night after work, and we had these caskets laying on the floor. We were scooting them around with their selection rooms, but what they liked is that they were making the decision. Out of these 30, you pick them. You can pick whatever casket you want in there. And so we merchandised all those floors, and it really made a significant difference in cash flow. We put more emphasis on service. We were one of the first ones to put more emphasis on service charge rather than casket. So we actually lowered casket prices overall, but we raised service charge quite a bit, put the emphasis on service charge. That made a big difference in the cash flow. I don't want to get into this next one yet because it's going to cause controversy. But the other thing we did, we said, now, when you're done with the arrangement, what do you do? We were working with our folks, and they said, well, we hand people get the contract, we'll send them a bill. You'll send them a bill. Did you ever think of asking for the money? Well, I don't know. You don't know our families. I said, well, I'm going to know them pretty quick here. And it explained to them what the problem was. They didn't understand. They thought Joe Albritton was raking all this money off to Washington, D.C. and spending it on just TV stations, whatever else. That's quite the contrary. He was throwing money in. They weren't collecting the money so we could pay our bills. And so we went through a lot of training. ENIC was very, very important in this role, and how to collect money, how to ask for the money at time for arrangement. And our receivables went from 90 days to like 28 days. So can you see the financial turnaround that was kind of taking place as we were doing this? John, you were there. You saw it. So the other thing we did is we shut down all advertising. That's a smart move, isn't it? Well, guess what? Everybody was advertising. Whatever each individual manager wanted to advertise, we let them do it. I didn't let them do it. That's what they were doing. So we were in more calendars and bulletins, which is not bad. I mean, we're still in some today. But any mishmash of advertising you could get, and I just shut it down one day. No more advertising. We brought a guy in by the name of Peter Palumbo, who was a retired advertising guy, lived in Palm Springs, loved cigars. Peter was a great guy. And we did a focus group study in LA, and in that focus group, we asked people, when you think of Forest Lawn, what do you think of? Cemeteries. When you say the word Neptune, what do you think of? Cremation. If you hear the word Pierce Brothers, what do you think of? Mortuaries. Okay? We had cemeteries. We had the biggest columbarium in town, okay, the crematorium. But people only thought of us as funeral homes. So we then went into two different types of ads, which really helped, and we did it all corporately. We might have had a little budget for the local promotion or whatever. But one of them was an ad that we won some awards on in LA, and it was very simply, we became we call it the silent partner ad. And what this would drive, was Glenn still here, or did he take off? Glenn would not like this, but it was very effective. We ran an ad that had no words. There was no audio. It was just visual. Now think about that. Sitting at home in your bedroom, in your living room, watching television, commercial comes on and there's no sound. People thought there was something wrong with their televisions. They really did. But it was us saying, do you know what to do when someone dies? Most people don't. I can almost do the whole commercial. Called Pierce Brothers Cemetery, Funeral Home, or Cremation. Pierce Brothers can help. But they were word scrolling. And it was very, very effective. And then we ran some more ads, continuing that with words. What do you do when someone dies? And do you remember who did those ads? I made my television debut. And we had little old ladies come up to the Pierce Brothers and say, I want to meet that guy. Well, I swear to God, we did. All right. The other thing we did was start a training school. All right. Why is that important? Well, we had 17 locations out there, and we didn't have any focused training on anything that we did. And Pierce Brothers was well known for this for the years. I mean, they would have started the training stuff. So Edie Glasscock again became the director of training, in addition to everything else I had him doing. And is this still on? Okay. And it really was effective. Anybody that we retrained all of our current people, and then trained anybody new came into the company had to go through our training school before they were deployed out in one of the funeral homes. Now this is probably, now we had generated some money. We were positive cash. Actually, we were doing very good financially all of a sudden. And so what in LA, for those familiar with LA, most of the funeral homes, there was a mortuary row downtown. And then there was Hollywood and Inglewood, and there was, the core LA locations. Our families weren't there anymore. Some of them were, but most of our families had moved out into the 3-county area, the valleys. And so we started buying in the valleys with this money we had now accumulated, where our families really went, people that knew the Pierce Brothers traditions and the quality and value. So it was very effective what we did. And what we would do is if we bought a place, we would call it it's Smith Funeral Home, and then we put Pierce Brothers underneath it, all right? And in about 3 or 4 years, we changed it to Pierce Brothers Smith or whatever. Because this brand, Glenn brought it up yesterday, your brand that you have is extremely important. But think of 40 funeral homes in the same geographic area with the same name, and how you can advertise and promote that name. And that's what we were doing with the Pierce Brothers name. But you also got to be careful. I learned this. There was a lady running around funeral service for a little bit. Her name was Bobby Yee. I don't know if any of you remember her. She was an image consultant from Disney. And we hired her. I went and saw her speak and whatever. We hired her for a little bit. And she taught me one thing that was very important, is that if you're going to brand your name, okay, and go out and advertise and promote it, you're only as good as your worst location. Think about that. And we had we'd done a nice job. We still had some locations that needed work. So we dressed, before we went out on this roll, we listened to Bobby, we upgraded everything we could, and that worked. Okay, so I mean, we had the GCT program. I don't know if Jeff even remembers that. Green, cut, and trimmed outside. All our new signs were changed. We were rolling at Pierce Brothers. After 10 years, remember, we lost $500,000, okay, the year I showed up. After 10 years, we had 64 locations. And what's important about that is out of the 17 we originally had, we shut down, I think, 6 or 7 of them. We just shut them down, sold Beverly Hills, whatever. So we grew to 64 locations. 40 of those were in LA, and then we went to also Central Florida. That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Think about that one. There was this little restaurant called Barron's out in the middle of the San Fernando Valley that we would have breakfast and lunch every once in a while. Bob Horn, besides being a great friend, was, again, a great employee. But I remember walking out of there one morning and saying, Bob, we're going to start going to Florida. We're going to buy some places in Florida. And he said, you've got to be kidding me. That's the most stupid thing I ever heard of. You're out of your mind. I said, well, I got other good news for you, Bob. You're going to go down and run them. And he had just lost his daughter. I don't know if you know that about Bob. His daughter was killed in a tragic car accident going home from San Diego from LA one day. And Bob was really depressed for about a year and a half. It was a long time. And it's so hard to pull somebody out of that when they've gone through that. But this was like giving him a new child. He went down to Florida. We had bought, the initial acquisition was 6 locations, Aycock Funeral Homes, Wade Aycock, really well known, great guy. And we ended up with 24 funeral homes and some cemeteries, and it was all attributable to Bob Horn. That was his family down there, and he took great care of them. Wish he was here. I wish he was here. All right, so we ended up handling 16,000, we were about 6,500 and dropping 500 a year. We ended up handling 16,500 families a year. Our cash flow was now running 28 days. The morale, how was morale, Jeff? I mean, it really was. I mean, for whatever, I don't think we over-communicated, but we communicated a lot with our people. And they knew we would have fireside chats, and the managers weren't allowed to be there. I would go around with a piece of paper and a pad, sit down with the secretaries and just other staff, part-times, whatever. And they thought I was coming to tell them something. I just flipped over my pads. I got nothing on here except what you're going to tell me. I'm going to take notes, and we'll get back to you. And then we followed up with them. When we did, we would follow back up to them. And so now not only did we have the managers charged up, we had their staff charged up because we did follow through on some of the things they wanted to do. Hell, they had some great ideas. All right, but once again, the owner, who I can let Bernie Garza stand up and give this little talk, had some financial troubles with another company, and the biggest asset he had, or the easiest asset to sell, was Pierce Brothers. And it was a dark day, wasn't it, Bern? Anyhow, I flew to Washington, D.C. I think it was on a Monday. I was out cutting the grass on Sunday. He called. He never calls me, okay, except for once every three months we'd have a board meeting. And he said, could you come to Washington, D.C.? I said, sure. So I go to Washington, D.C. for having breakfast at the Riggs National Bank. And it was a beautiful scene there because out of this picture window, you could see the Washington Monument was perfectly silhouetted out this window. It was a great place. And he started talking about what was going to happen that day, and I started realizing where that Washington Monument was going to go. Oh yeah. So about 30 minutes later after breakfast, we walked into the conference room, and there sits Bill Heidebro and Bob Waltrip. And my job was to help sell the company. And I'll share a little story with you. I'm sitting there, and they're bantering back and forth about price. I got my mouth shut. I'm not going to say anything. I don't want this thing sold. So Bill Heidebro gets a piece of paper, and he hands it to me, and it had a number on it. He says, is this enough? And I loudly said, don't talk to me. I don't want this company sold. You got to talk to Mr. Albritton about this. But it was done that was probably about 9:30 in the morning or so, and by 11:30 it was done. Done. And I'm not a big drinker, but I went to this place called Black's. Is it called Black's? So there's this bar that you can walk to not too far down the road. I know it was around noon or a little after. And I just started drinking Johnny Walker, Jack Daniels. And I was in no shape to go home that night either. I mean, I was just so upset. Because now I had to go, remember this family we talked about? And the morale that we had? I had to go back and tell these people what had just happened. I mean, it crushed me. It really did crush me. So what did I learn at Pierce Brothers? I learned that leadership really can inspire a company to greatness, because I'm not the best funeral director in the world, and I'm not the best cemeterian in the world. I knew a little bit. I still don't know enough about cremation that these guys sitting back at that table do. I know enough to get me in trouble at times. Well, I do need to go back and talk about the 494 program. But I learned that if you could gather a group of people together and communicate with them, and constantly keep them advised of what's going on, accept their shortcomings, and embrace their strengths, a lot of good things can happen. And I can tell you this, when I stood up, this 30-year-old guy stood up to the management group, the first meeting I had with them, I mean, there wasn't anybody there who gave me a chance in hell to be there more than a year or so. They knew I was going to be gone, because what does he know? Well, one thing I did know is we had two managers there that were not part of the team. Paul Fox and Ed Scholinar. Remember Ed? And so I remember we were doing, and I'll get back to this, we were doing the budget for Hollywood. And Ed had been there for, God knows, 89 years, I don't know. Long time. He was the longest term manager, and everybody lived in fear of Ed Scholinar. We're doing the planning budget session, and Ed's just giving me all kinds of grief. I mean, he says, I don't agree with this, So I let it go on, and as the meeting broke up, I said, God, Ed, let's get together and have lunch tomorrow. And so we had lunch, because I had warned him once before about this. And so at lunch, I reached in my pocket and handed Ed his final check to the company. He said, "How can you do that?" I said, "You're either on the team or off the team. I'm giving you 3 chances. You're off the team. You're not going to be here anymore." And he said, "Well, what can I do to get back?" And I said, "There's no coming back." So Ed's gone. Paul Fox, I did the same thing too. Now, an interesting sidebar of that, I'm jumping all over the place, but we bought this place called Westwood Village. You ever hear of Westwood Village? Where Marilyn Monroe's and all the celebrities are, not all, but a lot of them are, the ones that aren't in Forest Lawn. So I'm buying it from the Pierce family, and the Pierce family says, there's one thing, we'll sell to you, but there's one thing you got to do. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, Ed Schellinaar is our general manager, and we'd like you to give him a chance." And I don't think I could do that. He said, "Well, if you want this deal, you're going to have to do it." And I tried to talk him out of it. I couldn't do it. So we ended up buying it, and that day I had to walk into Ed Schellinaar's office. Say, "Hi, Ed, how you doing?" Ed looked like he had been out in a rainstorm. He was soaking wet. I mean, he really was, just nervous as hell, because he thought I was going to fire him. And I said, "I'm not going to fire you, Ed, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to move you to Valhalla, which was what our cemetery mortuary combination where our general offices were, and we'll let you manage that operation, and I'll keep my eye on you. And you do what you're supposed to do instead of what you did last time, we'll be just fine." Ed Schellinaar was named our manager of the year that year. He turned it around that much. And I think, Ed, I could call him up today, and we'd probably have lunch. He's a good guy, good guy. He just got derailed.
We have his pre-need.
You got Eddie's pre-need? God love him.
He wants to go in a Revere Silver, is it R?
R59?
R59?
Yeah. Boy, sales training manager. I know these numbers. All right, where were we? Let's go to the 494 program. I skipped it. Part of our problem at Pierce Brothers was that cremation rate, I shouldn't have said it's a problem. Our cremation rate in California, and more specifically in the Los Angeles area, was about 36% at the time. And there was at Pierce Brothers, our cremation rate was like 24%. Now, how do you think our managers felt about that?
Proud.
They were proud of it. By God, we're not going to do those cremations. We'll let somebody else do those. And unfortunately, here we got these cemeteries we can memorialize, and we got so many ways to memorialize, and they didn't get it. So I walked into the meeting after I toured all the facilities. I remember sitting out in the lobby in Culver City, and I heard the man, Mary Jane Johnson, I think was her name. Mary Jane's making an arrangement, and the family walked in and she said, "Well, how can I help you? What are your choices?" And they said, "Well, we want cremation." And you could hear Mary Jane go, "Oh." You could almost hear it. And that's how all of our managers felt. They didn't want to deal with cremation, okay? They probably made it if they dealt with it, it was probably a 20-minute arrangement. They just rushed it through, got them out of here, all right? Well, so the next managers meeting we come to, I introduced the 494 Forever program. And people to this day still think I was nuts, okay? Because you sign up for a 494 cremation, right? And we'll guarantee it forever. We'll guarantee it forever. The reason we did that, the motive behind the madness, was that we needed to be known as somebody that also handled cremations, all right? And even though the 494 would cover the basic cremation, whatever, it didn't cover all the memorialization points we had throughout our empire, if you will. And in our large arrangement offices, we had backlit, I don't know how to describe it, but visuals that when a family walked in and wanted cremation, we showed them all, we just flipped that switch and all these lights come on with, columbariums, glass front niches, scattering gardens, all this stuff, and we caught their attention. We really did catch their attention. And so 494, even though it sounds a little crazy, it might have been, our cremation rate went above 36%. And how do you think it affected our traditional business? It didn't hurt at all, right? We didn't lose any of our traditional. We just increased our share. Well, now we got a, remember, is it Krieger that had a barrel? That, once you fill up the barrel, the money, you cover your overhead, all of a sudden money starts flowing out the barrel. And that's really what happened. We had all this overhead. We didn't add any more people, all right? So we got all this extra income coming in, and our overhead's covered. It was a good program. All right. Service charge, reinvested back to the company. We really did that. The targeted, well-thought-out advertising. So advertising is not, one thing I've learned over the years, advertising is really not an expense. It is truly an investment in your future. But you really got to think about it. You really got to know what you're doing and do it right. We embraced cremation with a big growth factor with memorialization, utilizing our cemeteries, we already talked about. Pre-need also provided growth, although we could have done a better job with pre-need. Our parent company at the time was Pierce National Life. And we never really did a great job with pre-need mortuary, I didn't think. We could have done better. But anyhow, we did okay. Okay, when I joined, I believe this is right, Bernie. I had been told that he was trying to sell the company for $10 million. He got an offer from SCI at $6 million, okay? And he didn't sell. He brought me in. 10 years later, we sold for roughly $150 million. So we did okay. But then again, I learned, you're not in your control of your future if you don't own the company. So, and then SCI offered me a wonderful job at that time, and I said no. I didn't want to go work for them. Even though they were getting better, I still didn't want to go work for them. So what did we do? We founded Prime Succession. There's a lot of misnomers about Prime Succession. What I'm going to tell you today is the absolute unequivocal truth. It began in my mother's dining room. I remember, Bernie was a big part of Prime Succession. Bob Horn was, Bill Cutter. But they weren't ready to move yet. I was ready to get this thing going because remember, I'm the cage lion. So I'm in Batesville, Indiana, in my mother's dining room, and the phone sits about there against the wall. My mother is in her 80s, all right? So I'm sitting there starting to try to do deals, this, that, and whatever, and every once in a while the phone would ring, and I had to run to that phone before my 80-year-old mother would go pick it up. And so every once in a while, I didn't get there in time. And my mother had a way of answering the phone. I don't know if you've ever seen this, where a person answers the phone and goes, hello. That's honest to God how she answered the phone. Hello. And I thought, oh, God. But we got through all that in the early years. I'll never forget good old Mom for doing that. We had no locations, absolutely nothing. It was just a dream. We thought we could build up a group of funeral homes and not do an SCI thing, not price them up and cost them down, but really go after market share. The lessons we learned through Pierce Brothers, whatever else, try to take that to that level. Where's Greg Hilgendorf? Greg Hilgendorf was our first acquisition up in Minnesota. And he believed us. And we tried, to be honest, God tried. But anyhow, we started buying companies throughout the country. We brought in key people as partners, Bernie, Bob Horn, Bill Cutter, Steve Tidwell, Greg. In 3.5 years, we had 164 locations, 21 states, and we're the largest independent firm in the country. 3.5 years. Those are the years when Lowen was going nuts. SCI was battling Lowen. Everybody, if you wanted to sell, all you had to do was hold up your hand. Somebody would be at your door. At conventions, anybody go to conventions back in those days? They would just round them in. They were going through rooms, and they'd bring the next one in, and they'd go. They had contract machines sitting there printing out documents. They were closing deals. So anyhow, we became the largest independent firm in the country. The emphasis was, what we really tried to do was do the market share, not pricing thing. We made some great deals. One of the best deals we ever made was Fred Hunter's down in Hollywood, Florida. Everybody remember Fred Hunter? And I'll tell you what Fred Hunter did for us. Fred was a friend. And he called me up on a Sunday afternoon, I think, a Saturday. It was a Saturday. And unbeknownst to me, he was walking through the Atlanta airport and passed out. And it scared the heck out of him. And he and his wife, Lynn, and the boys huddled and decided they were going to sell. So he calls me up on a Saturday, and you got to listen to this time frame. and said, I want you to help me do something. I said, what's that, Fred? He says, I want you to help me sell my firm to either SCI or Stewart. And I said, well, first of all, I tried to talk him out of selling, and he yelled at me. He said, you don't understand what I've been through. I'll tell you when we meet, but don't try to talk me out of it because I'm going to sell. And I said, well, if you're going to sell, why wouldn't you sell to us? He said, well, I didn't think you'd want to come to Florida. I said, I can be there tomorrow afternoon. So I get on a plane and go down and see Fred Hunter. When I get there at his house, he's got stacks of books this big of all of his financial history, all his financial information. Fred was a consummate funeral director. I mean, he really was. And he had it all there for me to do. And then when I looked at the last year's financials, and I said, well, what do you want? How much do you want? And he gave me a number. So I said, okay, let me go home and digest all this. I'll see you in the morning. That was Sunday morning. Monday morning we met. I paid him exactly what he wanted. I got approval from our board up in Chicago. That afternoon we met with his employees and announced that's Fred Hunter. We announced to his employees that same day, and that afternoon he put an article in the paper. Couldn't believe it. So that deal was not only done, it was done, okay? And we needed to live up. And Fred, we didn't overpay or underpay for Fred. We probably could have paid him more. SCI would have paid him more for sure. But Fred didn't want much disruption to his troops. And I gave him my word we wouldn't do that, and we didn't do that. And so we married together pretty well for quite some years. Now, guess what happens when Prime Succession was doing really, really well. We hadn't made a bad move. The only bad firm was one that I bought up in New Paltz, New York. Remember Van Pine? Vanderlyn R. Pine had 3 firms that he owned. One he bought because it was Digger Phelps' dad's. One he had just fired the former owner who was responsible for all the business. And the other one was he let a guy go, his main guy in New Paltz, he had let go because he got a television from the embalming guy as a reward. But I wanted Van Pine, okay? I thought Van could bring us business. So that one we did overpay for, but not much. But Van became an apostle for Prime Succession in the early days, which was very, very important. But it was a bad deal. It was a terrible deal. Nothing went right. So that was one. But the other one was Alabama. We had accumulated probably 80 firms at the time. All of them were doing really well. I can tell you, all you folks that are thinking about buying or are buying, don't buy too fast, okay? Take your time, because you get so in love with what you're doing, and you got to have the deal and whatever else, and some of them just don't work. You got to say no every once in a while. Well, we weren't saying no to too many people. We bought these places in Alabama. I think there were 20 locations. We thought we understood the pre-need laws in Alabama. In the end run, we really had no clue. And it was a big mistake. So we had to go down and clean it up. Jake was involved in the cleanup. Bernie was there. I was there. Everybody. Steve Tidwell, who bought it, I made him go down there and stay until it was cleaned up. But we did. We cleaned it up. I remember going down on a Sunday afternoon to a guy's name was Marvin Culp. And Marvin was our GM. And I said, Marvin, and we were having dinner with him. He said, tomorrow you're going to fire your brother, your son, and these 3 people. He said, wow, I can't do that. I remember Bob Horn had sweat rolling down. And I said, Marvin, we got to do it. I mean, what you told us was the firm and what we could count on isn't there. And so we've got to make changes. And so Marvin did. So after that week, I went back, and Bob Horn taking me to the airport, and I said, all right, Bob, now here's the next thing you're going to do. What's that? Fire Marvin Culp. And so Bob stays. We have a meeting on Monday. We had our managers meeting. Bob walks in. We can see the move starting to take place in a positive direction. And I said, Bob, how'd it go with Marvin? He said, what? Well, I think we ought to give him another chance. Bob. So anyhow, long story short, Bob didn't do it. I had to go back down. We got it done. We got it done. But Marvin deserved to be fired. He lied to us. He absolutely lied to us. Now, it's our fault for listening and not digging deeper, all right? But you don't need liars in your organizations. All right, where are we at? Fred Hunter's Alabama. We turned, by the way, what we paid $40 million for, eventually we sold for $60 million in Alabama. So we turned it around. It was ugly, but we got it. Again, we started with zero value. I encountered some health issues at the time. I had open heart surgery in 1995. And when our investor group was a company called Golder, Toma, Cressy, Ronner in Chicago, and they basically called and said, hey, we're glad you're back, because I was back and I was feeling great. I feel great today. And they said, but we don't want to look to the future without you being part of it. And I said, come on, guys, but it wasn't going to happen. So they decided to sell Prime Succession for something that was zero. They sold it for $300 million. It was one of the best investments in their history of their company, only because of the short time frame. And the short time frame was because of health. It really was. We'll go through this, but the one thing I want to make sure you all understand, because sometimes our competition will say, Prime Succession, they went bankrupt. Well, Prime Succession was doing fine. I mean, you don't sell something that's going bankrupt for $300 million. But what they did when they took over that company, they stripped out all the pre-needs, everything you do with pre-need, they stripped it out. Prices were raised quite significantly. When they did that, case volume started to drop. And it became a mess. And plus, here's the team guy, here's the leader, they kind of cut the head off the horse, so to speak, and it was just more of a demand type thing. You will do this, you will do this, and Prime had a hard time. All right, so the thing that hurt me about Prime, I love the Pierce Brothers day. If I could go back, even today, I'd go back to Pierce Brothers. Because it was the family type thing, it was the leadership thing. I could touch on any funeral home in LA within a 2-hour drive, or an hour and a half. I really enjoyed the employees. I think the employees trusted me and enjoyed me, and but the success was phenomenal. It really was phenomenal. Try to turn a funeral home that's declining around. It's one of the hardest things in the world to do. You did it. You did it. Was it easy? Oh man, the sleepless nights? Yeah, really are. So anyhow, I missed the operational part of it because I love operations. That's limited touch points because we were so spread out with Prime. We had good operational man. Bob Horn was in charge of operations, but we probably spread Bob too thin too to some degree. But we had Greg, we had Jeff Casey, we had some great people out there. Spent most of this is the part I hated. You spent times with investors and bankers. Right, Kelvin? Man, there's nothing like it, is there? Nothing like sitting down with a banker. Banker comes in and says, hey, we want to do business with you. Oh, great. So you sit there, you waste an hour, 2 hours, and they really don't want to do it. Once they find out under the sheets what's all there, they really don't want to do business. Unless you got all these assets they can borrow against. Oh, yeah, then we'll do it. So anyhow, missed the day-to-day, although financially successful, once again realized I was not in control. I mean, even though I had a good percentage of the ownership, it was by far a minority share. And when the investors said they wanted out, it was the party's over, okay? So then we founded Johnson Consulting Group. I had retired to Naples, Florida. Oh, this is a great story. This is one of the worst things I've ever done in my life. I'm down in Naples. I figure I'm going to play golf the rest of my life. That's what I'm going to do. And I was like a 16 or 17 handicap, and I got myself down to a 6 handicap. Going to the Ledbetter School, I was driven, but I was also throwing clubs, and I was doing all the things I wasn't supposed to do. So after 6 months, I'm down there, and my wife, you might have been in a car the one day when we had our implosion. I mean, I was just the caged lion, and I couldn't be playing golf the rest of my life. So Cindy decides to get her hair cut or something the next day. I can't remember what she was doing, but she was not home. So I go in, I decided, oh, here's something I can do. I can alphabetize the pantry. This is a true story. I mean, it was a thing of, it was beautiful. All A, B, C, D. Soups, and then when you got the soup, you had to go to, anybody ever do it? Did you do it? Oh, she gets home and goes into the pantry for the first time and says, and Mom doesn't cuss, but she said, what the hell is this? I said, oh, I thought you'd be happy. I mean, it's alphabetized, so easy to get things. And she said, why don't you go sit down? This is exactly how it happened. And she said, I'll tell you what, you either need to get a job or you need to get out of here, one of the two, because this isn't going to work. So I did. I remember Ken Noss was one of the first ones called me up, and he needed an evaluation for a divorce. Actually, he was going through. So I said, yeah, I'll help you. And he said, what can I pay you? I don't want to get paid anything. You're a friend. And then he must have told somebody, and then I get another call. I think it was Jack Todd out in Pomona. I said, I'm on my flying Dick out, or Dick's going to buy me out. Could you do a little evaluation? For sure, I'll be glad to help. What can I pay you? Nothing. I don't want to get paid. I'm happy to do it. It gives me something to do. And then that kind of grew a little bit to the point to where I said, I better start charging. That'll shut this down a little bit. So I started charging for my services. Bad move, because the word got out, and now the phone's ringing, not off the hook, but a lot of business was there, and I couldn't handle it all. I mean, Bill Cutter came in and joined me a little bit. Dave Heard, when he retired, came in to help. But the most significant move was in 2004 when Jake got involved, because I needed somebody to administratively handle all this bizarre stuff that's going on. And I think he was probably appalled, because I'm kind of a loose cannon in some degrees. I don't, I leave the detail up to somebody else. I just want to do deals. And so Jake came in and looked what I was doing and went, oh my God. But he straightened us out. We got everything was lined up, and I's were dotted, T's were crossed. Things that drive me crazy. All right, applied for a fee, started to charge, mostly M&A and valuations. We brought Jake in. He started the ancillary services. The one thing I love, mergers and acquisitions. I consider myself a great negotiator with these people that I deal with. If one thing you can't do, if you are an independent operator and it's time you're thinking of selling your business, don't do it yourself. I don't care who you get, but don't do it yourself, okay? That's the best advice I could ever get you. Whether you choose us or not, I'd love to do it for you, obviously, or Jake. But lesson learned. You just, what the hell, when we were selling Prime, we didn't do it ourselves. We hired an investment banker to do it. And these guys are professionals at it, these investing groups. So anyhow, the one thing about M&A is that it will run peaks and valleys. You do a lot of deals, then you don't do any deals. Not deals, no deals. And that was driving him crazy too. Didn't drive me crazy, just a little more of a challenge. But anyhow, what Jake decided that we ought to do some other services to kind of fill up those valleys. And that's when he brought in accounting, the surveys, performance tracker, management services that we do. I say performance, does anybody, who here uses performance tracker? Do you really use it? That's a hell of a tool. I mean, it is a tremendous tool. If you're not aware of what it is, if you don't do anything else with Johnson Consulting, you ought to look at our performance tracker program. Because you can dissect your business in so many ways to really understand what's going on. It's wonderful. Anyhow, he brought that in. We also brought in key people to handle these functions. I've been referring to them all day. Greg, Jeff, Al, Bernie, the list goes on. We are by far handling the majority of M&A in the country. Even SCI uses us. The firm I wouldn't go to work for, Why would SCI use us to sell other locations? Any idea? The ones they don't want? No, they know all the buyers. We do it better and faster for more money than they did. I mean, they tested us. They ran tests at us to see if we could do it. And plus it allows their guys to concentrate on the things that really matter, where they have given up on these firms. But we do a good job for them. Now, on the flip side, everybody says, well, you're in bed with SCI. We really aren't. I mean, they buy maybe 1 out of 10 deals we bring to the table. So, yes, they'll see every deal we have probably, but most of the times they say no because they're very specific in what they want to buy. All right. The company's growing fast. We've become the largest consultant. We were the largest regional firm. We became the largest independent firm in the country. Now we're the largest consultant in the country. So there is a history here. The lessons learned. M&A, we already talked about that. Jake started to say key employees make the real difference. They really do. Must provide quality service to maintain the top position. We're working on it. The hard thing with us right now is we're growing fast, and it's so fast that it's hard to keep up with it sometimes. And we'll make mistakes from time to time. But we'll get them fixed. If you have a little patience with us, you'll end up with a really good product that gives you a lot to help you build value at your funeral home and improve your products and services. Most funeral directors don't think they need help. Boy, that's a lesson I've learned over the years. They really don't. They'll talk, okay? But when it comes time to spending a few dollars to do something that can really help them, a lot of them just say, I'm not going to worry about that. And those that do are above the rest. So, what time is it, just out of curiosity? How much? I got 15 minutes? Oh, perfect. We'll end early. So here's the things I think I've learned over time. These slides drive Jake crazy, but I like to do them everywhere I go. That is this guy. Now, the old timers will know who this guy is. The young guys probably won't. Anybody want to yell out a name? W.C. Fields. Why would I bring W.C. Fields into a presentation? Well, W.C. Fields was in a movie called The Gambler. I don't know if you ever saw it. I saw it back in the day. And he's sitting there playing cards with a bunch of his cronies. And a guy walks in and he says, I see you're playing a little poker. You care if I join you? Is this truly a game of chance? And W.C. just kind of looks over his cards and says, not the way I play it, my son, not the way I play it. And what the lesson I think you learn from W.C. Fields is a lot of funeral directors kind of gamble with their business. They really don't do the studying. They really don't do the planning. They really don't. As long as it's about what I did last year, that's fine enough with me. And I call that gambling with your business. And you can't do it anymore. I think 30 years ago, maybe when I first joined, when everything was pretty mellow, you probably do it. But if you're not planning out your business, if you're not getting your staff involved, you're taking a chance with your business. This guy. Well, it's The Godfather. The only reason I bring up The Godfather is that if at any point in time where you are thinking mergers or if you want to buy or sell, we'll make you a deal you can't refuse. We'll get it done for you. We're very successful at what we do there. Why? Because we're good at it. We are really good at it. And people will say oftentimes, what's my firm worth? And we'll really say, we don't know. We got an idea. But until we get willing buyers out here to look at it, we really won't know. But the one thing I can guarantee them is that we'll drive it to the top. We'll drive it to the top. Whoop, skipped one. How about this one? This ties in with the whole program here. Anybody know who that is? Come on. Well, it's Alice in Wonderland. I don't know if you remember this scene, but it's Alice in Wonderland's walking down the road, okay? She comes to a fork in the road, and the Cheshire Cat's up there, and she says, well, gee, Cheshire Cat, which way do I go? And the cat looks down and says, well, that depends on where you want to go. And she says, well, I'm not sure where I want to go. And he says, well, then it doesn't make any difference what path you take. Think about that a little bit. But it's really, when you talk about planning, I mean, if you don't know where you want to go, you don't need to do any planning. Just roll the dice, be a W.C. Fields, all right? But you need to do it. Strategic planning and tactical planning is very important. The Natural, Robert Redford. I don't know if I couldn't get the picture of the scene that I really wanted, but there's a scene in that movie with Glenn Close. Remember Glenn Close? He's in a hospital bed, and he's just lamenting that he could have been the best there ever was. And she says, well, the way I look at it, you get two lives, the one you learn with and the one you live with after that. And that's why you come to these seminars. That's why if you walk out of here with anything, you walk out with some more knowledge than you had in the past. And you learn something and live with it after that. Whoop, I don't know, my favorite one. Come on, show up. Jake. One back. Hell, I don't need a slide, although it's a beautiful slide. There. Everybody know who this person is? Yell it out. Somebody. Jeez. Yeah. Scarlett O'Hara. And this is the biggest trait I see in funeral service. What do you think that trait is? I'll worry about that tomorrow. Okay? Instead of putting plans in action right away. I mean, you and I had a discussion about that once in a room. I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget that day. Yep. You know, instead of sitting around talking about it, do it. Just do it. So that's it. Any questions at all about what I talked about this morning? Yes, sir. Well, nobody likes the logo but me. But the reason I like it is because I've made money with it wherever I've gone. But the theory is that it's two guys, it's joining a partnership. It's armed. Where is the logo? Can you get it up? It's two people shaking hands. Here are the two guys. Huh? Did that on a plane going from somewhere to somewhere. I don't know where. Might have had a little something to drink.
What's the story with Prime Succession, your investment company that was involved with that? How did they get involved?
They tried to hire, when I was president of Pierce Brothers, they tried to get me to do a startup company. And they probably spent 2 months trying to woo me away from Pierce Brothers. I think with the intent that Pierce Brothers, maybe we could turn around and buy Pierce Brothers too. And I was having so much fun, I didn't want to leave. You don't even know that. You guys don't know this story, by the way. Nor do you. So they spent about 2 months whining and dining and whatever. It's a great guy's name is Bruce Rauner. He is now governor of Illinois. Bruce Rauner, great guy. But I kept saying no, I kept saying no, I kept saying no. I said no a lot back there. And so we did not join them. Well, then they heard that Pierce Brothers had sold. And so Bruce calls me up and says, can you meet me in San Francisco? I met him in San Francisco at the airport. We spent 15 minutes together, and he gave me $25 million to start that company. Right, Bern? Kevin. What's that? You were? Boy, it goes way back. He was the attorney, correct me if I'm wrong, Bernie. He was the attorney handling the deal for a funeral director in San Diego, Benbow, Legler Benbow, I think. Somebody, he was representing somebody to buy Pierce Brothers from the Pierce family. And the deal fell through. And after a period of time, he came back to the family. Am I right? There you go. Then he ended up buying the life insurance company that owned Pierce Brothers. And all I remember, he did it in 1958 because he planted 58 fir trees. That was kind of one of those questions at Valhalla. You know, if you didn't know the 58 fir trees, you would be immediately terminated. So I learned that one. He was a good guy. I mean, he really was. Even though Pierce Brothers and Pierce Financial Life allowed him to do a lot of things, he's a very successful man. I mean, he died, but he just never really had a loss. I mean, it was too easy to sell. It was just too easy to sell.
How long from the time you went into Pierce Brothers
I think 2 years. Once we sold Beverly Hills and some of the other stuff. But I didn't turn it, we turned it around. I mean, the group turned it around. Bob Horn and the rest. Yeah.
What role in growth did Pierce National play?
None. I mean, we actually became as valuable or more valuable than Pierce National Life. So.
What was your reason for thinking when you left Batesville?
Well, I came back to work for Paul Buck. I really liked Paul Buck, and Paul retired. I didn't know. I mean, I had already resigned from where I was going and went to work for Batesville to work for Paul. And when I show up at the sales meeting where we were supposed to meet, he announced his retirement, and they brought in a guy by the name of David Beaver. Do you remember David Beaver? Became president. He was a strategist from Ohio State University. Him and Talasik and something else, Blackwell, Talasik, and Beaver. And you talk about a guy that should not have been named president of Batesville Cast Company. I mean, terrible communicator. He asked you to do things, you do them, but you need him to sign off on them, and it would just sit on his desk for months. And I got tired of that.
Moving away from something, not to something.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yes. You got to talk loud. I can't hear very good.
The 494 forever.
Yes.
What did that do? How did it work? And was it paid down 494 and you will guarantee forever? Or how did it
Yeah, they had to give us $494, and we guaranteed to have pre-need contact forever. For very simple. That wasn't the motive necessarily. The motive, Neptune was $595 at the time or something else. We just needed to really let people know that we also handled cremations. Anybody ever see Chapel of the Pines downtown LA? It's a hell of a place. They have 3 or 4 retorts down in the basement. I mean, they're really well done. We weren't using them. We weren't using them. So that was the motivation. I don't know, in the long run, I think it was a good move for us because we didn't lose any of our traditional business and we filled up our overhead with it. We did sell up on that a lot. Not all, but a lot, with the memorialization points. Yeah, that was my idea. Our funeral directors were going to shoot me.
Of the journey from 17 to just, let's say, the 40 in Los Angeles, forward, what do you think the total tally, you had this, you closed off some Pierce Brothers, you ended up with 40 locations, there were a lot more than 40 businesses, multiple locations.
Here was the magic to Pierce Brothers. Everybody, what I said yesterday, you answered the phone, Pierce Brothers, Cunningham O'Connor, good old Martinoni, may I help you? Even that sounds crazy, but Cunningham O'Connor was a leading Catholic firm in Los Angeles, really well known. And Dick and Joe weren't getting along, and they wanted to sell, and so Dick came to my office, and we cried, and we got to be great friends, still talk to this day. But the magic of it was we had buildings around town. They had a place in Hollywood, they had a place in Alhambra, and I can't remember, and a place downtown. So the reason that deal was magic, we allowed Dick and Joe to keep their property. We put restrictions, they couldn't be used as funeral homes, and we just bought the business. And we sold for about 50 cents on a dollar. But they made more than they could have with anybody else, any other buyer, because they could sell their properties for full commercial value. But we did that with them. We did that with good old Martinoni. We did that all over town. And we kept bringing businesses into our existing locations. And we top dressed our locations. They looked great, okay? I really think they did. I mean, we really spent a lot of time on it.
But in total, you ended up with a total of 40 funeral homes
In LA,
in LA. How many total names go with
probably 60. Yeah, that's a guess, but somewhere there. And that's what the magic for SCI. I mean, again, it still pains my heart. Pierce Brothers was sold. And why did it make so much sense for SCI? Guess who else had locations in almost all the places we were? And so not only did they buy a business that was growing, that they basically ruined, by the way, they really did, except for the combos. The combos marched on. They would go into Santa Monica and close our Santa Monica property, Moeller Murphy Moeller, sell that property for untold millions of dollars, moving it over to Gates Kingsley Gates. Where was Praisewater? Canoga Park, they did it. I mean, just over and over again, selling facilities.
Any Pierce Brothers in LA, off the top of my head, today that are not combos?
I don't think there are any.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I don't think they are. Well, that's a combination of two things: poor management by SCI back in those days, and I'm kind of bad-mouthing SCI a little bit, but remember, I'm kind of talking about those days, because I really think they did poorly manage their places back in those days. Today, they got a whole new regime down there, and I think they're trying. I really do think they're trying.
Talk about throwing away a brand.
They threw away the brand. They threw away the brand. But the other thing, Pierce Brothers did a potload of Catholic business in town, and now you got the Catholics putting funeral homes on their cemeteries. That would,
There's still Catholic families going to little neighborhood funeral homes, I know.
no, that's right. That's right.
Including some of the properties that don't have the Pierce Brothers name.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. Oh, no. I hated SCI. When would we cross over? I don't know who was here at we run this tournament every year. It's called the Memorial Classic. We've been doing it for 35 years. This is our 35th year. And last year we contributed over $100,000, $124,000 to the Funeral Service Foundation and ICCFA Educational Foundation. And it used to be just a golf tournament. I mean, that's all it was. Well, now, I mean, you were on some of the early ones, Greg. Just a bunch, 16 guys getting together. Well, now it's 130 guys getting together. And the reason I'm bringing it up is SCI. SCI asked us, they tested us out, they gave us some products or some funeral homes to sell prior to them buying Lowen. And we didn't know they were going to buy Lowen, but they gave us some funeral homes to sell. So Jake and I meet with them out at the Princess Hotel in Scottsdale, play around the golf, and when they left, we knew we were going to get this bulk number of their funeral homes to sell. So that was our test. And how did we do? Well, we did great. We sold them quick, we sold them fast, we sold them for more than they thought they were going to get. So all of a sudden, they thought we were pretty good. And we put some money in our pockets, and we thought, well, we probably invited them to our golf tournament. So they come to our golf tournament. This was, I can't remember what year that was. When did Lowen sell? Did anybody remember? Yeah, somewhere in there. And so they come out, and there's Tom Ryan and Mike Webb, and maybe one or two more at the time. And they responded. They came up with a nice sponsorship. So I thought, I got to say something nice about these guys. So, and when I got to announcing them, I said, I just want to let everybody know in this room, SCI sponsor, I think at the time it was $5,000, for a dinner, And I want you to also know, I used to hate these guys. I really did. I did not like SCI because I think SCI. I kind of get it now, but they were purely, you can't go into funeral homes and just slash people and costs and jack prices up $1,000 and call yourself a good owner. I think that just stunk, personally, and it just drove me nuts. Because IFS didn't do that, by the way, nor did Pierce Brothers. But they did it, and what they've learned over the years is that they can't do it either. I mean, I don't want to tout SCI now, Jesus. But I mean, we've done some big deals with SCI, and the things they do nowadays, they don't make any changes. They let attrition, for the most part, 99% of the time, they let attrition take its place. You know, they don't go in. What they will do is they'll be aggressive pre-need wise. You know, but Ken Noss, God love him, one of my best friends. You know him very well. He called me up, wanted to sell his place. We work on it. The first time, Bob Walters was on the phone saying, "How can you ask for that price? That's just way. We're going through a Great Depression here. You can't ask that price." I said, "Well, if you want the place, you're going to have to pay that price." And so they held firm and we held firm. I told Kenny, "Don't sell, don't sell." So 6 months later, the phone rings. It's Bob Walters again. And he's saying, "Well, I don't know, maybe we can pay a little bit more here." And then it really wasn't him, so he just wanted to say hi. He sent his henchmen and Mr. Webb and Mr. Ryan to the Johnson Consulting office in the conference room where we've all been. And they sit down, and Noss is sitting there with me, and about 15 minutes into it, the deal was over. Negotiations are an interesting thing. I love negotiating things, but I don't know how I got on that subject. They're not so bad, guys.
We tapped you for 92 of them in 2014.
Which one?
The divestitures with Stewart.
Oh, yeah. There was 78, I think. Maybe it was 92. But there's two types of divestitures. One is the Hart-Scott-Rodino. The FTC says you cannot buy these firms. And I think there were 78 with Stewart, I think. And these are nice firms. We're talking about wrestling down in Dallas, Texas. We're talking about some amazing firms, and they can't buy them. So now, the Federal Trade Commission? There's a little bit of play. But what they'll say to SCI, you got to get rid of, you got too much in this market. Well, that's up to negotiations between them and SCI. Not much. The FTC holds the cards. But we got that call, and we sold those 78 firms. The key is there's a time factor on those. And so they need to be sold, I think, in 6 months from the trigger point, somewhere in there. And we got it done. Well, I'm honest, I'm sincere, I care about them. They're good guys. Yeah. What you're hearing from me today is who I am. I mean, anybody that's known me for a long period of time, do I have a little bullshit? Probably, you know, about as much as y'all. But by and large, I back up what I say. I'm not a liar, okay? That's what burns me up sometimes. I hear from our competitor that, well, Prime Succession had failed. Prime Succession didn't fail. The new owners created the failure. We were doing just fine, we got to get the Godfather back up there. There is no trend in multiple. Everybody wants to know what multiples are, okay? Multiples, you'll end up somewhere, but let me ask you a question. Are you a rural firm doing 60 calls in South Dakota or a 1,000-case firm in New York City? Which multiple is going to be higher? There's going to be a big scan of multiples in the one in the major metropolitan area. Is your funeral home in a house that was built 200 years ago, or is it in a facility that was built last year, top of the state of the art? Is there a difference in multiples? You bet there is. Is your funeral home growing in business? Is it declining in business? Does that affect multiple? You bet it does. So you got to be really careful. I mean, we can study your business and kind of give you an idea of what we think it is, but the only way that we do something nowadays is called an auction. It's a confidential auction. And we will, if the firm wants to go through it, we can take your business out to a group of people that are buyers that we know can close, and we'll find out what the value is. Now, let me get back. So what's the normal? If we were going to start, you'd kind of start with a 6 times, all right? And then take all these other little factors. And there's a ton of them. We got a matrix for them. There's like 20 factors that you really play your multiple on. But it just burns my butt, okay, when you're reading a Funeral Service Insider that Dan Azard or somebody quote, well, they average about 6 times. It isn't. It isn't. I've seen them sell for as high as 8 and as low as 4 and less. A lot of them nowadays, you've got to be careful. You don't want to hang on too long because a lot of them are selling for property value, period. Maybe a little bit for the pre-deeds. We got some we can't sell. Nobody wants them. Too small, too rural. It's an interesting dynamic going on out there. Again, I've been doing this, the buying and selling part I've been doing since 1982. So been around the block a little bit. I've kind of seen it. Don't you folks want to take a break?
Back at the peak of the frenzy,
Yes.
when everybody was trying to buy everything, so to speak,
Yes.
what were some of the high multiples?
Highest multiples paid, to the best of my knowledge, were for us in Rose Hills. And both of them were about 13 times. And our average buy was about 6.2 or something like that. So we buy firms, we increase their cash flow. We buy them for 6 times at this cash flow. We increase cash flow to this, and we sell it for 13 times. Yeah. Those days are over. Absolutely over. Although there are people, there's funeral directors around. I've just got done dealing with one that we couldn't sell it because of what he thought his funeral home was worth, and it's not. Well, the public company's got cash. So you got that. Individuals, there's a lot of SBA lending going on. We've got a group of banks that we deal with that can provide it. Live Oak Bank, they're an SBA lender. That's what they do. We do it too. There's a lot of good regional people that are buying, that have built up some wealth, that have money to put down, and their banks will lend to them. Typically it's not your local banker, all right? Jake's got some guys he's dealing with that will lend money on the land a little bit, a little cash flow lending. Well, my buddies at SCI, they lost that suit. But they're going to appeal it. But supposedly, what it came out, it was announced. Did anybody read it besides? Yeah, that the Archdiocese is going to get those funeral homes back. That's the word on the street. Now they're going to appeal the hell out of it because there's $9 million of EBITDA at stake. Without financial compensation. Yeah. Well,
So lose what they paid plus $9 million again.
yeah. Stewart put $40 million of hard assets into those cemeteries. $40 million. And the Archdiocese is saying, well, but that was only with Stewart. You know, this new buyer can't get that benefit. I can't hear you, Hank. I did a lot of dove shooting in my life. Oh. Oh. Well, I don't publicize this, but I also own 3 funeral homes in Los Angeles, or not Los Angeles, and 2 in Phoenix and 1 in Batesville, Indiana. And I don't do it for tax purposes, I just ended up that way. But one is called Whitney Murphy, the other one's Mankey out in Sun City, and then Weigel Funeral Home in Batesville, Indiana. Does 80 calls and does almost the same cash flow as Mankey, who does 400 some calls, but it's 80% cremation. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough market. Peter's doing a great. Peter Strand is our manager there, and we are lucky to have him. He's doing a wonderful job. But anyhow, I've owned those firms since 2004. And Sean, anybody remember Ed Murphy of Whitney Murphy Funeral Homes? I mean, you talk about a great guy. I mean, he's just a great guy. And he was my dad died many years ago. And Ed was kind of like a father to me. He really was. And he and I didn't totally disagree on everything. He always wanted me to add that chapel on, and da-da-da, and I couldn't do it for him. But anyhow, his son, Sean, was running the place for me since 2004, along with Al Asta. Okay, Al's got a part-time job at Whitney Murphy. So I decided, what I wanted to do was get the firm back. I could have sold it to SCI for a big number at this point in time. But I would prefer to sell it back to the family. And so we just did it, what, Al? February 1st, it's back in the family's name. Thanks, Hank. Yeah. I am what I am. I really am. I am what I am. Don't you guys want to take a break? Let's get out of here. Come on. Take a break. Thank you. Thank you. You got to follow that.
Oh, yeah, thanks.